and say you're not involved. Don't try to convince yourself that these problems don't affect you at all. Because now it's Lebanon, Azania, Grenada. How many more? Tell me now, how many more? Don't you stand on the sidelines and watch your children go off to war. Don't stand back and wait for this violence to come to your door. Because now it's Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador. How many more? Tell me now. How
Peace and love. Welcome to U.S. Political Prisoners and You, brought to you by the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition and EPPC. I am Brother Frank, and today's topic we'll be talking about Attica Uprising from the dates of September 9th to September 13th, 1971. There was an uprising. This uprising, exactly what it was uprising, meaning that it was organized, it was structured, it had rank and files. People had different assignments. You had a brother like Frank Big Black Smith. He was the head of security. Then you had a young brother, age of 21. It was Elliot. What was his name? Elliot James. Elliot James L.D. Barkley. He was the voice of the negotiation. He spoke adequately. He was very clear about what was happening, and he wanted people to know that it wasn't people who were acting just spontaneously. It was organized. It was structured. It was reason why this was going on. Prior to the uprising, you had these conditions that people, that inmates, so-called inmates, had to live under. They were dealing with poor working conditions. They were underpaid. They were working 14 to 16 hours. Their mail was being read. They was just they were not given proper clothing. So a number of issues was going on, and it was stirring up. And this was the climate of political consciousness, right? You had the Black Panther Party, you had the Young Lords. So all of these issues were going on. And I think that it's always important to revisit our history, right? Not just during the time that it's time to commemorate it, like it's September, right? So September 9th to the 13th, that was the time of the Attica Uprising, but it is during the time that things happen in the world. Like you had the incident with this young brother they found him hanging from a tree, right? Very unfortunate situation. A 21-year-old Black student was found hanging from a tree in the campus of Delta State University in Mississippi. That was September 15th. So when we look at these situations that happen, this brother Reed, we have to ask ourselves, why does this continue to happen? And that's when we have to look at our history of resistance, of organizing, have structure, having focus, being determined to seek out some demands, make sure these demands are met, right? Because if these demands are not met, then the conditions will continue to exist. And my heart goes out to the family of this brother, this young brother who had his whole life ahead of him. Please stay strong. Let's continue to just share the information, see what's happening, see what's the next steps to take. We know that these events have been happening far too long, and obviously that there's not enough being done if they continue to happen. But when we look at the uprising in Attica, we realize, like Malcolm said, by any means necessary, right? These inmates, organized, structured, and committed to this act of taking control of the prison system to make sure that the demands are made gives an example of what it takes when you had enough, when you reach your boiling point, that you have to get serious, that you have to let the state know that this is how far I'm willing to go. So we shouldn't be intimidated. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about our history and see what happened, learn from it, learn to get better, implement it in our current times. Um, because that's what it takes to protect our future, to protect our children, to uh, be very serious. We have to be very serious about what's happening. We have to be very clear, um, consciously, of what's happening. There's a direct relationship between the Attica Uprising and political prisoners, right? They both represent immense sacrifices. You had those who were involved in uprising who lost their very lives. And we got to ask ourselves, why they were involved in uprising. They knew that that could potentially happen, but yet and still they took a position that I'm going to stand up for what is right. I'm going to be involved in resistance. I'm going to put it all on the line because enough is enough. I can't continue to just have a blind eye to what's happening. I have to make a commitment to getting involved. And when we talk about the Attica uprising, we have to make the distinction between uprising and riot, right? A lot of times, those who are reporting on our response wants to tell us how we need to respond, whether we need to respond one way or another without even asking us. So that's why it's very important to have a clear distinction between a riot and an uprising, right? A riot is a spontaneous act that has no structure. An uprising is a calculated act that has structure, right? And that's why I laid out Frank Smith. He was head of security, so he was keeping hostages safe. He was keeping those who came to be a part of the negotiation. He was keeping them safe, and he was represented that structure that was necessary to show that this is organized action taking place, and this is very serious. And when you have that in play, then you have those who are negotiating, those who are hearing you speak, take you very seriously. They had, as the negotiating was going on, those who were involved in this negotiation made demands on who they wanted to have there representing them. They had William Kunstler. He was their lawyer. He negotiated the demands, and that was very important that they had somebody who understood the law, somebody who understood the importance of fighting. They wanted representatives from the Black Panther Party. They had Bobby Seale. He came briefly. They wanted representatives from the Young Lords, and I just gave you an example of what they were aware of, what was going on, and the fact that they needed people who knew about the system and knew what they were fighting against, and needed that proper representation. And as I did preparation for this episode and I looked up and researched the Attica Uprising, I was impressed by what they did. I was impressed by the fact that they reached out to a number of organizations. They reached out to the New York Times. They wanted a reporter that represented, that would be unbiased, that would represent them, or at least give their story what it needed, which was respect, which was a clear understanding of what was taking place. I was just looking for the statement that LD Bard, their voice, had said. He said, "We are men, we are not beasts, and we will not be beaten or driven as such. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed." Obviously, there's sharp political analysis of what was happening and what needed to happen in response to oppressed conditions. So that gives you an idea of the distinction that was being made from being informed to being conscious, right? Many of us are informed, some of us are conscious, right? And we act on that. That determines the level of consciousness we have by what we decide to do with the information we are provided with. Certain people are informed and they just give information to other people. But once you are conscious, there's no turning back. You understand that there needs to be an act that needs to take place based on your level of consciousness. And that statement that I just read, that lets you know what was happening. That voice was the voice of those who took a position, who took a stand, who decided that enough was enough. There were a number of demands being made. The key demands were better living conditions, improved medical care, legal and parole reform, end to brutality, fair labor practices, political and religious freedom, and amnesty. During the amnesty one, they were not able to get, and they also wanted to meet with the governor. The governor did deny meeting with them, and later on will be criticized for not meeting with them. Uh, and all the killings that took place when the state took over the prison was done by the state. So that lets you know that the state was willing to kill innocent people as opposed to sit down and talk. And that is very alarming. That is very disturbing because we are supposed to be a civilization. We're supposed to operate with some level of civility. And obviously that was not the case during the Attica Uprising. But yet and still, we have to look at that part of history and salute those brave men who took a position, who said that enough is enough. I'm not going to be mistreated, right? The fact that I'm being held against my will, the state has charged me with a certain crime, and I have to do this time. That's one penalty. But why should I have to give another penalty of not being treated like a human being, of my human rights being denied and being deprived of? You had certain situations where inmates were only allowed to shower once a week. So that was not going to help their conditions. That is, you're living in that environment, and that's not beneficial to the entire population, especially when you have diseases that can break out and everybody health is at risk. But the Attica Uprising gave us the example that is necessary for us to decide, what are we going to do, right? We look at what's going on in Palestine. We look at this genocide taking place. We got to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What position are we going to take? And when you look at the uprising in Attica, you realize that, you have to be serious. You have to make some demands. You have to commit yourself to making those demands met. You have to be willing to make sacrifices. You have to follow the examples of our political prisoners who knew that the state would respond in such a manner, but yet instill the love that they have for our people is worth putting their lives on the line, is worth risking their so-called freedom, is worth whatever sacrifices is necessary for the freedom of our people, for our self-determination to not be interrupted. So as we look at the Attica Uprising and we look at the people who were getting involved and we look at the response of the state, you had those survivors of the Attica Uprising. They were being tortured. Big Black, they had him naked. He had a football underneath his neck, and he was told, "Don't let that football fall. If it does, then he was good as dead." You had inmates witnessing other inmates being killed, and very unfortunate situation. And just to think about the long time trauma that those who witnessed that have to endure, have to deal with. And when we look at the key demands, why is it that you can't make the demand for better living conditions? Why is it that you can't make the demand for improved medical care? Why is it that you can't make the demand for legal and parole reform? Why is it that you can't make the demand to end brutality? Why is it that you can't make the demand for fair labor practices? And why you can't make the demand for political and religious freedom? Those are serious questions, and to let you know that the state, is very arrogant, and you have to put pressure on the state. And because of the sacrifices, because of the work that was done with the Attica Uprising, you did have change being made. But unfortunately, things went back to the way they were. But still, in all, that example of what needs to be done, what extremes need to be taken. Is for another generation to look back on the history. That's why during this time is important for us to look at that, get politically educated, look at the conditions that existed, look at the response, look at the tactics that were used, and look at the errors that were made. Because no activity, no actions are perfect. The Panthers make errors, the Young Lords make errors, everybody makes errors. but it's through the errors that you become better, that you become more committed, that you become more conscious, and you understand that, this is something that you're going to have to give to another generation as they examine their conditions and say, what should I do? What was done before and how is it done? Oh, okay, I'm gonna do it like that, but I'm gonna add my little twist to it. I'm going to do something, because to do nothing is only to make the matter worse. And in fact, as I've said before, is to pass down um, a crisis or oppression to another generation, and that's not moving the people forward. And that's why when I come on this platform, I'm always looking for people to get involved in this work. If you're a writer, we could use writers at the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition. We could use writers to organize defense committees for a number of our political prisoners that are out there. People like Fred Muhammad Burton, people like Mumia Abu Jamal, people like Ronald Reed, people like Imam Jamil Al-Amin. We have to look at the Attica Uprising as an example of what can happen when you stand up and fight back, when you resist. Right? Think about in the historical content, how many people are going to study this? You're going to have future lawyers, they're going to study this. Future advocates of social justice is going to study this. People who want to take on the responsibility of a politician, who want to engage in that as a profession, and they're going to be elected officials, and they're going to have to ask themselves, what does the Attica Uprising mean? How am I going to utilize this to move people forward? Because people are going to say, why does these conditions exist? Didn't people fight back? Didn't people stand up? Didn't people die for those changes to occur? And if they were willing to put their lives on the line, we should at least be willing to listen, to ask ourselves, how can we show solidarity? How can we show respect for the sacrifices that others made, right? Solidarity, that's key. Solidarity is an organized action. It is taking action based on your consciousness. You're deciding that sympathy is not going to change anything, right? You need elevated compassion. You need to express solidarity if you're serious about change. And change can always happen. You always have to be willing to do something if you're serious about change. And that's exactly what the Attica Uprisings teaches us. It teaches us that, there are people in the world, or in this particular case, there are people who stood up and fought back. And yes, the state responded, but they still gave us an example. They say that enough was enough. And let us think about, you have George Jackson, our beloved freedom fighter, our martyr, he was a prisoner of consciousness. He was assassinated in July of 1971. So 2 months later, in September of 1971, that climate is brewing. And that's why it's important that we read George Jackson, right? George Jackson was encouraging brothers who were in prison to be politically active. In order for you to be politically active, you had to be politically conscious. So George played his role. He gave you a critical analysis of concrete conditions so that you knew exactly who the enemy was. And I think that that's very important, because, after his assassination, you had 700 people, 700 inmates going on hunger strike. So they felt what he was saying. Their consciousness had rise to the point that they were going to engage in a hunger strike. And that itself is a form of resistance, right? Because while you're in prison, you are state property. So now what you're doing, you are disrupting state property, right? By going on a hunger strike. Now you're supposed to go to work. How productive are you going to be when you are on a hunger strike? You can't work as much as you once did when you did have proper nutrition. But this resistance needs to happen, because there needs to be a response to what's taking place, because it's through this response that change happens, right? You can't expect change to happen by doing nothing. You got to engage. You got to see who's doing what and play your role, because now the numbers increase. Now, those who are examining what's happening in a prison or in our community realize that this idea is an idea that is going to find its way amongst the masses. This idea is going to elevate, and once it elevates, then the tension between the oppressor and the oppressed is going to increase. It's going to be elevated until that arrangement is fully addressed. And the only way it can be fully addressed is with total liberation. But that takes time, time, place, conditions. Uh, so the fight is ongoing. The resistance is ongoing. We need to take a position. That position needs to be definitive. And we need education. We need education politically if we want to make things happen. So these demands that were made, these demands were made because the prisoners had enough of what was going on. Just imagine being told that you can only shower once a week. Just imagine being told that you had to work 14 to 16 hours. Just imagine spending all this time working, and when you come out of prison, what are you going to have in terms of dealing with society, right? You paid your so-called debt to society. Now, do you have housing? Do you have skills that are going to be used in this so-called free world? These is questions that you ask yourself, or you have to ask yourself from the perspective of being concerned about those people who are coming from prison and coming back to our community. Right now, their attention is going to be felt in the community. They might take it out on the community. And that's why we have to do our part to making sure that those who come home are welcome, right? We provide our resources. We do what is necessary to advance them, because these are our family. These are our community members, residents, and they are one of us. And that's why the Attica riots, the Attica Uprising is so important to study, because now you start to see, the seriousness of it. You realize they shoved all those people into the so-called correctional facility, right? It was overpopulated, so that was adding to tension. You had 55% at the time were black, and then you have most of the officers, the prison officials are white. So now that tension is going on. We don't relate to each other. We from different backgrounds. You want me to do what you want me to do when you want me to do it. It's no level of professionalism, and that is only environment for things to go from bad to worse. And the uprising is an example of, if things are not taken seriously, then they could get to a point where other matters have to take place. That being prisoners take over the prison, prisoners get the attention that they were neglected getting, right? Because they were an organized group that had a manifesto, and in the manifesto, it addressed the issues that they made on their demands later on. And I thought that was interesting because it was presented to the governor, and the governor ignored it, and it didn't take it very seriously. But now, when you have an uprising, now all attention is on the governor, and the governor still didn't take it serious enough to actually show up. But he sent a representative, and that only made matters worse because they were not being taken serious. And the governor took heat behind that, right? So now you talking to the president is giving you instructions on how to handle the matter, and then look what happens. You could have negotiated, you could have saved lives, and now the blood is on your hand, the state's hand, because you refuse to be to negotiate. You refuse to be civil. You refuse to sit at the table and hear the concerns as if those weren't valid concerns. As I said, who wants to be told that you can only take a shower once a week? Who wants to be forced to work for a number of hours, and at that, you don't even have the proper equipment, such as the proper clothing? So these were serious concerns. These were not like prisoners were asking for things that were not attainable or not even reasonable, and that makes you think about our current situation, right? You have issues with subways, the fares rising. You have lack of affordable housing. You have a number of these social conditions, and people rally, people organize, people raise their concerns, and the state still responds the way the state does when it's ready, when it's pressured to make a move. And that's why we, as the working class, have to look at our power in our labor. Imagine if we withhold our labor, there's a general strike. Now you have the state's attention. I remember working at UPS. This was decades ago, and I was there during that 15-day strike, and they had the attention of the state, right? Because that labor was interrupted, and at the time, the UPS was responsible for a significant portion of the ground mail. So now you can't have business as usual. So my position is that we have power as working class people when we examine um, the structure of capitalism. We examine our power in that content. We examine our power as a labor force. So I relate that directly to the Attica Uprising because you have people who are not working for these days that they had the uprising. So now, if the jail is making money off your labor and you're not working because the jail is under your control, you are expressing your power. You are expressing that this is what I can do if my demands are not being met. I am a human being. I want to be treated as a human being, and you're going to take my demands seriously. You're going to hear me one way or another. So we have to really salute our brothers who took up that position, who did what was necessary to get their voices heard. And we got to look at it from a position of how organized they was, how disciplined they were, how committed they were to that cause, because enough is enough. And they paid attention to the time, to the political climate. They reached out to those who they needed to reach out to. They got the attention that they needed to get, and they made their demands known, right? So for years to come, people are going to look back at this and like, what were the demands? Oh, the demands made sense. You want better medical care. You want proper. You want better living conditions, right? Better living condition that includes better food, right? I know the Muslim population, they were concerned because most of the food had pork, and that was against their religious diet, and this is also against their religious freedom, right? I should be able to worship as I see fit. I should be able to have that freedom. Taxpayers make that decision. You put this prison together off taxpayer dollars. So the taxpayers should have a say so on, what I have access to, and these demands make you realize how the state operates, the viciousness of the state. And for the governor at the time to not want to sit down and hear those demands, let you know that, wow, that's a problem. The relationship between the prisoner, right, and elected official is so far removed, it's so distant. The state official claiming to be the supreme authority and doesn't even need to listen to you. That is of serious concern. But you take a stand, you take your stand firmly, and you win other people over. And that was very interesting how that was done with the Attica Uprising. They knew that they had to win people over. They put their demands out there. They used whatever platform that was available to get that done. So, in the spirit of immense sacrifice, we salute those who were involved in the Attica Uprising. And we want those who are viewing to write to a political prisoner. Come on out August 18th to Curb Fest. If you happen to be in New York City, come on out to South Jamaica, Queens, the South Jamaica Community Center. For more information on this event, you can contact me at 347-679-3936. If you want to volunteer, we'll have some work for you. Again, that's 347-679-3936. Y'all know the call, free them all love.
Indians lived proud and free before the oppressor's slavery. Black people live proud and free. How many more? Tell me now. How many more? Don't you stand on the sidelines and say you're not involved. Don't try to convince yourself that these problems don't affect you at all. Because now it's Lebanon, Azania, Grenada. How many more? Tell me now. How many more? Don't you stand on the sidelines and watch your children